Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of the Lightning Lunch Sessions. My name is Ben, and today I am joined by Richard from Human Evolution and Behavio BSc course at LJMU. For those of you who have joined us for previous sessions, you might already know some of the information relating to Zoom. And for those of you watching on demand, you just need to disregard any of the following information. But if you have never used Zoom before, we cannot see or we cannot hear you, so you're completely anonymous and you are hidden behind your own screen. There is an opportunity to ask questions, both live at the end of today's session, so you can do that using the Q&A tab, or if you're watching in the future on demand, you can email us at outreach@ljmu.ac.uk, or if you're interested in finding out more about the course, you can email courses@ljmu.ac.uk. Today's session will last approximately 30 minutes and will be on demand afterwards if you are watching now and you want to find out more information. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to Richard.
Hi everybody, welcome to this Lightning Lunch session. My name is Dr. Richard Jennings. I'm an archaeologist and I'm also the program leader for Human Evolution and Behavio BSc at Liverpool John Moores University. So what I'm going to do in this session is I'm going to just give a very brief introduction to the course and what we mean about human evolution and behaviour. And then I'm going to describe part of our human journey, our incredible human journey in the past. It's such a vast journey, and that journey is going to be focusing on the Neanderthals. And some of you may have heard of Neanderthals, you may not have, but hopefully after today's session you'll be a little bit clearer and a bit inspired by what you're going to learn from them today. So the Human Evolution and Behavio BSc, what is this course all about? Well, it really asks some of the fundamental questions concerning our existence from a biological and scientific perspective. So questions such as fundamentally, when did we become human? Who are our closest relatives in the past and present in terms of living primates today? How did humans adapt to environments in the past? And how are we adapting to environments today? What are misconceptions around the term race, which is obviously very prominently used and talked about as a theme today? And what role have diseases played in our evolution? Again, with regard to COVID, it's a very topical sort of subject to think about and explore. And are we still evolving as a species? So there's lots of very interesting questions which you can address in our course. And we focus on around 5 different key themes. And I'm going to mention these very briefly before we touch on the Neanderthals. And one of them is called paleoanthropology. So this is examining the human evolutionary record through the fields of human skeletal biology, genetics, archaeology, and environmental science. So a lot of what I'm going to be mentioning about Neanderthals is part of paleoanthropology, which is this sub-area of this human evolution and behaviour degree. So this is about looking at the fossil record, the archaeological record, looking at what we find in the ground in terms of telling us about our past incredible journey. But we also study living primates as part of human evolution and behaviour, because of course we are primates, and we can learn a lot from studying our nearest cousins, our nearest living cousins, how they adapt to environments. So we have a lot of interest in studying primates. And here you can see one of our professors is in Africa using drones as part of observing a different primate species. And there's a link there to a show on BBC One if you're interested in primates. It's on the iPlayer at the moment, which is well worth a look. So in humans, another primate ecology, we look at subjects such as diet and genetics and health and disease. So this is something we're looking at for all primates. And of course we are primates. So this is something of ourselves to look at too. So it's fascinating to study primates and look at how they use medicinal plants for their well-being if they're getting sick. And with genetics, there's such a revolutionary changes in ancient DNA work and the study of genetics over the last 2 decades. There's such a growing and exciting field to become involved in, and there's great insights to learning about our past. And we look at human variation around the world today, and we look at it from the perspective of genetics and anatomy to understand about human diversity. And I guess the best way to sort of touch on that theme is to understand about how humans have adapted to different environments around the world, such as this picture you see at the bottom here in Peru and South America and the Andes, how high altitude living has altered the phenotype or the body in terms of its functions for adaptation to high environments, coastal environments. In contrast. And the area that I'm particularly interested in, and I've specialized in, is in archaeology. So for those of you who've come across archaeology in your school, then this is very much a key part of what we do in human evolution behavior, and in particular, looking at archaeology from the period of what's known as the Ice Age period, so more than 10,000 years ago in particular. This is a period when we're focusing on our human evolution. So with archaeology, we find what's known as material culture, or by this we mean things such as stone tools, artifacts, bone points, and sometimes clothing or shells that are used as necklaces. These types of information that are left in the archaeological record can inform us about behavior. This is where the behavior side of things comes in and is explored in particular, and is linked to studies we can link to cognition and brain size development in our evolutionary past. So archaeology is a really important tool as well in exploring our past. So, as I said, we have so many interesting avenues of research for exploring our past. And here you are meeting your past, our family tree, our Homo sapiens family tree. So you can see there's a number of characters on it, a number of ancestors of us. Some are ancestors and some are not. And this is only a handful. There are many more as well. But I want to draw your attention to the very top of this, what's known as our family tree. And you can see Homo sapiens there, second in from the right at the top, next to a closely related cousin called Homo neanderthalensis, or the Neanderthals. So the rest of the talk, I'm going to be focusing on Neanderthals in particular. But you can see this is the top of the tree is between now and around 500,000 years ago. That's when our evolution of our particular species has emerged. But if you go deeper in time, you can see the chart on the left there, the axis goes present 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 million years ago. It's thought that it's up to 6 or 7 million years ago that we last shared a common ancestor with the chimpanzees. And the chimpanzees are the most closely related species that lives today to Homo sapiens. And intriguingly, genetically, we are more closely related to chimpanzees than chimpanzees are to gorillas, which is really fascinating. So we shared a last common ancestor around 6 or 7 million years ago, and archaeologists and paleoanthropologists are busily excavating at archaeological sites, fossil sites around the world, trying to find our earliest ancestors and trying to answer key questions of our evolutionary past. This has been going on since the time of Charles Darwin in 1859, onwards from then. And we still have questions, many more questions that need to be answered. So it's a really exciting discipline to be involved in. And it's very much cutting edge, very scientific in its approach. So you're very much taking this type of degree program will really enhance your scientific skills. We provide a lot of support for the development of those skills. So let's then turn to the Neanderthals. Now, Neanderthals, some of you will be sitting at home there thinking, or at school thinking, okay, what do you know about my first impression of Neanderthals? Like one of those psychological tests, one of those questions. Like if I said to you, Neanderthal, what do you think? What do you think of? And you might say cavemen is kind of something like that if you're aware of Neanderthals. So these kind of images you see here are kind of the stereotypical images of Neanderthals that kind of give slightly bad press, to say the least, to Neanderthals. And the aim of this talk really is to reverse that thinking that you may have ingrained in your head. And if you do, you're not alone. I think only as recently as last month, I heard the President of the United States of America, Joe Biden, no less, use Neanderthals in a very disparaging manner, describing someone as a Neanderthal. So I was quite alarmed by the fact that the President of the United States would perpetuate this myth, which I'm going to explain to you, about Neanderthals. And it's obviously something which is has an origin from somewhere, so hopefully I'm going to explain that to you now. So you can see these pictures now, which are typical, but these are reconstructions of Neanderthals. What if we reconstructed them a little differently? So here you see, over the last kind of decade or so, some different interpretations of Neanderthals using similar fossil bones to make these reconstructions. Here you can see Neanderthals with humanity. And this is something which we may not be that surprised about, given that these are our closest evolutionary cousins, the Neanderthals. So were they like this? Or were they like that? This is where we come in as scientists to explore this question. Neanderthal bones were first found in 1856 in a place called the Neander Valley in Germany. So no guessing where the name Neanderthal came from. So these bones represent the first that were ascribed to be Neanderthal fossils. And you can look at them, you can see that skull there. It has these ridges over the eyes, and these are called brow ridges. This is a very characteristic element of a Neanderthal fossil. And here are some of the limb bones associated with them as well. So they were found in 1856, and then further bones were found over the course of the rest of the 19th century. And then in 1908 to 1911, a very famous place in southwest France, there was a discovery of further bones, and in particular in the LJMU rock shelter area, there's a rock shelter called La Chapelle-au-Son. And here you can see some fossil bones from a fossil nicknamed the Old Man of La Chapelle. So those bones there, this is an old man, and it's thought that he had rickets and he had arthritis, and you can see some holes in the skull. It was like he had very bad teeth. So he was very much an old individual that was buried in this cave. And it was that individual, when it was reconstructed, that the cave kind of mythology became perpetuated. Because here's a reconstruction done in 1909, around the same time as that discovery of this old man, La Chapelle. So you can see there's thinking that these were kind of brutish caveman ancestors who couldn't have been ancestors of modern day Europeans. So it's kind of like differentiated and looked upon in a disparaging manner. So based on the skeleton with arthritis of an old man, this is where this myth really was born. But we know that Neanderthals lived right across this mid-latitude region of Europe, if you see on this map here. And more recently, in the last 10 or so years, 15 years, they're finding some in Siberia as well. But Neanderthals lived in mid-latitude regions of Europe, and right across from Wales, in fact. If anyone's been to North Wales, there's a cave called Pont Newydd Cave, and some Neanderthal teeth were found in there. So there are sites in Wales, and there are sites in southern Spain and Gibraltar, which I'll mention in a second, right across to the Middle East. This mid-latitude, they occupy this mid-latitude part of Europe. And as well as that find at Pont Newydd, I excavated a site a few years ago. I was part of an excavation team in Linford in Norfolk, where we found Neanderthal stone tools, and we found the giant woolly mammoth tusks, which are quite amazing to excavate. And these woolly mammoth tusks then represented an environment which is very cold, an ice age environment compared to present day, and Neanderthals were up in Britain at this time. So they were right across the mid-latitude region of Europe. So there's morphology. I'm not going to go into much detail on these because I know that you can replay these slides, so you can have a look at some of the features. But it's kind of, they have a large skull shape, which is different to ours. It's more kind of larger in the back. Ours is more larger vertically in the front. And they had some, this particular brow ridge going across here. and they had a large nose as well. And again, please look at this in your own time to have a look at the comparison between a postcrania, in other words, below the skull, skeletal remains versus a human living today. And you can see that this more robust is the overall theme. They're quite shorter but stockier than the average person. And it's thought that why were they short and stocky and we're kind of taller and thinner? And it might be that this is an adaptation to the Ice Age Europe, where it's very cold and they're very further north than our own species, which evolved and dispersed out of Africa around 125,000 years ago. Or was it the fact that they were living in Europe is quite mountainous compared to, like, say, the Sahara, the savannas of Africa? So maybe it was this terrain, sort of undulations of terrain, which made it quite a difficult landscape to maneuver through. So maybe they evolved in Europe for that reason, from the point of view of terrain. Or maybe it was just a genetic happenstance that the populations that moved into Europe had evolved in that particular way, were just slightly stockier. So again, we don't know the full answer, and you're very welcome to come and do our degree and lead the field in that direction, because there's still plenty of happening in this field, which makes it exciting. So in terms of archaeology then, we know that Neanderthals made stone tools, and this type of stone tool is called the Middle Paleolithic, for those of you who are interested. And this is sort of another rock shelter in France where these were first found. And this is what they looked like, these stone tools. So they were essentially manipulating a core, it's called, a large stone. They were manipulating, flaking it in order to produce a nice point. And this is called a Neanderthal point, or a Levallois point, made out of flint, very fine-grained rocks, or cherts. So they had these points, which were probably used on spears for hunting. And they also made scrapers for maybe for hides, and also for working with bark. We have a PhD student at the moment here who's studying what's known as residue analysis, or residues on these types of tools, to see if we can tell us about what people were using, what the Neanderthals were using them for. So we can deduce that some Neanderthals were what are known as hypercarnivores. In other words, they ate lots of meat. We can tell that from the animal bones we find in the archaeological sites, the types of prey they're eating. We can also tell it from the fact that they had this bodybuilder I've talked about, and the spears I've talked about, they were hafted onto wood, and they thought that they were thrusting spears right up close into animals such as deer and in this kind of rugged terrain of Europe. So we think that they were hunters, sophisticated hunters, using stone tools. And we also find that the wooden spears themselves have been preserved in archaeological sites as old as 400,000 years ago. That organic preservation of wooden spears has been found. And intriguingly, one site 50,000 years ago, as if you didn't need more of a smoking gun, you have one of these stone tools embedded in the neck of an ibex, I think it was, or a deer. So it's showing you they were definitely hunting. Yeah, they weren't all hunters. Just like people all around the world today, we have different diets, depending on what different part of the world we come from. And it's the same with Neanderthals. We've got to look at that, like I mentioned about genetic variation and earlier about the people in Peru and adaptation to high environments. We've got to look at Neanderthals as having that same variability and exploiting resources in different parts of this mid-latitude region of Europe. So down in Gibraltar, we have Neanderthals that were actually eating pine nuts, and they were near the coast, and they were exploiting. We found bones of dolphin down there and mussel shells. This is a fireplace of mussels shells in this cave called Gorham's Cave, this is Vanguard Cave, but there's Gorham's Cave here as well. These massive caves. That's Vanguard as well. But there's massive caves in Gibraltar, and I undertake work here. I'm going to mention that a little bit later because you guys get the chance to come and dig here too. And what are their complex behavior? How were they? I made that question at the start. What makes us human? Were Neanderthals human? Did they think like us? Did they have self-awareness like we did? This is really intriguing questions because we find some bone teeth artifacts with piercings and perforations in them, or with evidence of that they were wrapped around and worn. So they may have been wearing ornaments. So why would you wear ornaments if you weren't self-aware? So just think about that for the moment. Let's look at the other lines of evidence. Were they able to speak? Well, there's a bone. Everyone has a bone in our throat called the hyoid bone. And this bone controls the movement of air through the larynx. And this enables us to, for us to be able to speak. Neanderthals had that bone as well. And so did some of our earlier ancestors too, actually. Did they use shells and pigments? Yes, they did. So using shellfish was something which was considered to be quite a complex behavior to go to the beach to do. But some of the shells we find in caves, you can see this one on the top left has really nice pigments stains in it, which means it was used as like a container to hold pigments, which possibly were used for adorning themselves, but also possibly for painting on caves. And intriguingly, in Gibraltar and in other sites, we found bird bones, and these bird bones have been literally these tiny cut marks and breaks on them, fracture breaks, indicating that they were exploiting birds, which is quite, again, sophisticated hunting for one thing, but also they were selecting feathers from birds of prey, which clearly weren't. Birds of prey are carnivore. You don't eat carnivores, you eat herbivores, as it were. So these carnivores were exploited for their feathers. And not only that, we could tell that they were preferentially selecting black feathers in a cave in Gibraltar. With all the bird species around, they were focusing on one particular type. So it's really intriguing to think what these Neanderthals are up to. Certainly weren't those cavemen types you and Joe Biden and others might hold that view of, because that's in the modern world today. And here's a bone of a raven from another site. Again, a raven couldn't be further removed from being a kind of a food source. These bones were exploited, and they had notches on the side of them. You can see these notches down the side. These were put in, inscribed, or incised into this for a reason. We don't know what the reason is, but it meant something to the Neanderthals. And in Gibraltar, we found this incredible hashtag-like symbol, which is what it is, engraved into the floor of the cave, left by the Neanderthals. What does this mean? We don't know, but it's clearly showing you that they were engraving something. We found under the microscope many lines going back and forth. Maybe they were using it to cut up a slab of meat or something, but then it seems to be more to it than that, and we haven't got an answer to that. But it all adds up to this idea that maybe there's this kind of more complex behavior associated with Neanderthals than we've realized. And so more recently, there's some wonderful sites across Europe, some caves across Europe where you find cave art, beautiful paintings such as Lascaux, Altamira. Most of these have always been thought to have been left by Homo sapiens, the first peoples arriving into Europe like ourselves. But recent dating work has been done, and it's considered that some of these are actually older than before the Homo sapiens arrived. Therefore, Neanderthals are the prime candidates for people to be doing this kind of cave painting. So it really is opening up our understanding about Neanderthals. And also, just around 5 years ago, there's a cave found called Bruniquel Cave in southwest France. And most Neanderthal sites tend to occupy the front of caves. And we find Neanderthals in caves, by the way, because caves are great archives, time capsules for preserving past environments. So there's kind of a preferential selection going on, preferential bias. We don't always imagine that Neanderthals just lived in caves. We just happen to find them in caves because they preserved there. But deep in this cave, a structure has been found dating way before the arrival of Homo sapiens into Europe. And this is 176,000 years ago. That's KYR is 1,000 years ago, KYA. This is like a structure made up of stalagmites and stalactites that have been put in some form of circle shape. Again, we can use complex dating techniques to work out how old it is. But it's another mystery. So hopefully I'm raising more questions than answers. And these are really exciting developments which you can learn about with this degree program. We know from looking at the bones, I've mentioned the old man of La Chapelle here in the middle again. Someone must have been looking after him because he couldn't fend for himself. And there's also an individual with a withered arm in a cave in Iraq called Shanadar Cave, where one of my colleagues works out and does excavations at. And here's another cave, another bone, someone with some very bad dental work required, but that person was being looked after and cared for as well. So they cared for their elderly and their sick. And sometimes they had, there's a debate about the idea of Neanderthal burials. Again, like I said, we find them in caves because sometimes they're buried in caves. But like some people will say, well, let's just happen to have got that body fell there and then it was covered over, but other people put much more meaning into interpreting Neanderthal burials. Like, is there a process that was involved? Like we today around the world, there's actually different cultures you live in. You have different funerary practices. So we don't know what the Neanderthal funerary practices were, but sometimes we see evidence that human bones were defleshed and burnt. And this probably wasn't necessarily cannibalism, but maybe it was more to do with some funerary ritual practice. Again, more questions and not enough answers for you, but that's the whole point of coming to university to study. Genetics has played a massive part and since 2010, something big happened in 2010 in genetics. And that was that we've had these Neanderthal skeletons since 1856, wasn't it? I think I said at the start. But it's only in 2010 that the actual nuclear DNA of a Neanderthal, the technology of genetics became so sophisticated that we were able to extract the Neanderthal genome. So we're able to extract it and then make comparisons with living populations around the world today. And the major outcome of the study in 2010, when with this announcement of the human genome, the Neanderthal genome was sequenced, was that we share Neanderthal DNA. So up to 2% of genomes of people outside of Africa, 2 to 4% even, are derived from Neanderthals. So that means you can all stand up where you are and say with pride, you are part Neanderthal, unless you're from sub-Saharan Africa, when that contact didn't quite happen. So it's quite extraordinary that the genetics can tell that story, and it's only just the beginning of the genetic story. We're learning so much about this. But the fact is we interbred with Neanderthals effectively. For us to have Neanderthal DNA today means we interbred with them at some point in the past. And it's thought that they diverged around 440,000 years ago, but then there were times after that period where they came into contact with Homo sapiens again and interbred. So if they're able to interbreed, that really begs the question about their kind of sense of self-awareness and who they were, and to having viable offspring. We've really got to remove this dichotomy and think, are they actually that different than ourselves? And intriguingly, genetic evidence in one cave in Siberia, I think a finger bone was found, and the genetics was done on it, and it came out as not being Neanderthals or not being Homo sapiens either. It was another type of entirely unknown hominin species that lived during the Ice Age called the Denisovans. And this is a map showing you that our story of recent human evolution is about looking at our own species, which dispersed out of Africa and interacted with Neanderthals and also Denisovans. So it's really becoming a complex picture. And here's a representation of that. Again, you can look at that in your own time, but you can see these three branches, and the red representing genetic exchange, the red line between modern humans, Denisovans and Neanderthals. So up to 5% of DNA of people in Southeast Asia have Denisovan DNA in them, for instance. So where does this all leave us then? Just to sum up, what happened to these Neanderthals then? Why aren't they living today? Well, as I said, we interbred, and successive populations of modern humans have moved in, modern humans being Homo sapiens, have moved in, and gradually over the years, over the last 40,000 years, that the proportion of the Neanderthal DNA in us has got less and less. But there was a recent discovery where you had almost, they found by chance, a first generation offspring of a Neanderthal and a modern human, and it was found it was like 60-40%. So it really was a genetic exchange occurred. So that's one thing. Was there competition for resources? So modern humans arrived into Europe around 40,000 years ago, 45,000 years ago, and there were the Neanderthals. And maybe they were competing for similar resources, or maybe they're exploiting different resources. We don't know, but competition for resources may have been an issue. Disease. Well, I mean, like two populations that haven't been in contact for many thousands of years coming into contact. Disease working both ways is going to be a massive situation. We know from, I teach a module called World Archaeology in the second year of this degree, and here we talk about populations arriving into the Americas, the arrival of the Spanish into the Americas, and massive diseases were spread, and there's lots of massive loss of life through disease, through this, for populations that have been separated for long periods of time. So demography, maybe that modern humans were just able to outcompete in terms of had a higher birth rate. But one of the theories which I lean towards is climate change. And we see during the Ice Age, Neanderthals were living in this environment of quite severe weather living across Europe. And that maybe gradually, through many thousands of years, that population numbers remained low, and that they were on the way to becoming extinct even before Homo sapiens arrived. But ultimately, right across Europe, this could be done for different times, different places, different reasons. Could be explained for different times, places, and regions. So this is, again, a very exciting topic with regard to Neanderthals, what happened to them. And this is a map showing you that we have to become familiar with quaternary environments, or environments of the last ice age. So it's really interesting to understand about the Earth's past and climate change. We know where we're going forward with climate. We know what needs to be done. But it's intriguing. If you look at this chart on the right, this shows the last 2 million years. That red line is temperature. And you can see that it's not been stable. During the Ice Age, it's cold, warm, cold, warm, cold, warm. So we're on a warm at the moment, but we were on a warm anyway. But we've kind of added this as our own species have added this signature to climate change. But it's interesting looking back in the past and how humans responded and Neanderthals responded to climate change, and it can offer insights to our own species going forward. One of the last places we find Neanderthals is in Gibraltar, Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar. So I mentioned this site in particular because this is where I lead excavations with my colleagues in Gibraltar, where we actually excavate Neanderthal remains. And there's a picture on the bottom left there of one of my excavation teams from a few years ago digging inside the back of Gorham's Cave. So the cave is located right beside the Strait of Gibraltar, if anyone's been down that part of the world. Very nice climate today anyway. And it was probably very suitable for Neanderthals in the past as well. The most southerly location away from the Ice Age and all of the glaciers in northern Europe. So it was a bit of a refugium for Neanderthals, really, which explains why there's a late survival. It's also one of the last places that modern humans arrived into Europe. Intriguingly, they didn't seem to cross the Strait of Gibraltar, even though modern humans were across the Strait of Gibraltar at the same time. We don't see a massive wave of people moving in, which might show you that Neanderthals were, in fact, quite adapted and stable in that environment and were difficult to shift. So then, just to sum up, are you one of these categories? I mean, each morning when I look in the shaving mirror, I see a Neanderthal staring back at me. One of the famous archaeologists, paleoanthropologist Milford Wolpoff, said that. So he was saying that we are a part Neanderthal, and that view has certainly become cemented now. But it's only a matter of history that we're not all Neanderthals today, that we must realize that Neanderthals weren't this kind of brutish cavemen that were easily rolled over by modern humans coming in. They were complex individuals, I think self-aware, and we're really part of our own Homo sapiens. Really, we're a branch rather than calling them separate. Really, it's just the way that the terminology is. So you guys are the next generation of researchers to carry on this research, and believe me, there's plenty to be done, and lots of different avenues. And I'll leave it there, just to say that, as I say, if you click on that, if you type in that YouTube link, you can see some of the excavation work we do in Gibraltar. And this is something that's done as a voluntary placement at the second year of your degree, end of your second year, but you can come out earlier and later as well. So we provide food and accommodation, but you do need to cover the cost of a flight. But it's a month in a really extraordinary place doing cutting edge research. So I'll stop it there. Thank you very much for your attention, and any questions, please, as Ben said, to get in contact. Thank you.
So we don't have any questions in the Q&A, but that's fine. If you do have any questions that you maybe think of over the next few days or hours, whatever it may be, you can get in contact at outreach@ljmu.ac.uk. And if you're interested in the course, Human Evolution and Behavio BSc, then you can actually go onto Google or the LJMU web pages and find out more about some of these specific modules that we study, which Richard leads on as well. So we will finish there. And thank you very much again, Richard, for joining us today. And join us again for some of the future Lightning Lunch sessions. Thank you very much, everyone.